So today I'm here with a basic topic of English grammar, that is phrase and clause. That is phrase and clause. What is a phrase and what is a clause? What are the definitions and examples of phrase and clause? How can we define phrase? How can we define clause? What are the differences between phrase and clause? That is a topic for today, and I'm just going to demonstrate a little bit about it. There are so many things about phrase and clause because it's a sea of a grammar item. Okay, it's a sea. It's just like a sea. Okay, unfathomable sea. So in this sea, we want to dip to some extent. Okay, so phrase. What is phrase? Phrase is basically a collection of some words. Some words are being placed side by side can form a phrase. Just like, for example, if we go to the example at first, that on account of, it's a phrase. On account of is a phrase. On is a word, account is a word, and of is a word. So these three words construct this phrase on account of. That means because of something, for the reason of something. That means on account of. See here, if you consider this example, on account of, here you can find that there is no subject and there is no verb. Only it's a collection of some words. So there is no responsibility of a phrase to have a subject and to have a verb. So a phrase is always devoid of any subject, devoid of any verb. It's just a collection of some words. Okay? But what it has a meaning. So a phrase has always a meaning, but that meaning is without any subject and without any verb. That is the difference between phrase and clause. A clause is also a collection of some words, and a clause is also, and a clause is a part of a sentence. A clause is a part of a sentence. But the basic difference between phrase and clause is that a clause has obviously a subject and a verb. A clause has always a subject and a verb that a phrase doesn't have. What a phrase doesn't have, the clause has. That is subject and a verb. But a clause has a meaning also. So that is the similarity between phrase and clause. If one asks that what is the similarity between phrase and clause, there is similarities between phrase and clause. There are two similarities between phrase and clause. Number one similarity is that a phrase has a meaning and a clause has a meaning. Number two similarity is that a phrase is a part of a sentence and a clause is also a part of a sentence. If one asks what are the dissimilarities between phrase and clause, we can answer that a phrase and clause has several dissimilarities also. A clause has a subject and a clause has a verb, what the phrase does not have. So that is the basic difference between a phrase and a clause. Now come to a clause. If we consider clause, if we come to the clause section, we can find out that basically there are three clauses. But going further to the three clauses, I want to explain the clause to you. I have explained the phrase to you. Now I explain the clause to you. I saw the boy who is my friend. I saw the boy is a clause, and who is my friend is a clause. Okay? This is a principal clause and this is a subordinate clause. What is a principal clause and what is a subordinate clause? We have to find out later. But this is a principal clause and this is a subordinate clause. Now, what is a principal clause? If you come to the principal clause, what is a principal clause? The another name of principal clause is main clause. The another name of principal clause is main clause or independent clause. The word independent comes from the word independence. That means something that has no something that has no dependence on any other thing. That is called an independent thing. So a principal clause is an independent clause that does not depend on any other clause. So a principal clause is a main clause, and the principal clause is an independent clause that does not depend on any other clause. Now, how many principal clauses should be there in a sentence? In a sentence, there must be only one principal clause. Okay? In a sentence, there must be one principal clause. But how many subordinate clauses are there? So first come to the point. What is a subordinate clause? A subordinate clause means a dependent clause. That means a clause that entirely depends on a principal clause. Without the help of the principal clause, that subordinate clause has no meaning at all. The subordinate clause may be a meaningful one if it has with it a principal clause. If it does not have with it a principal clause, the subordinate clause has no meaning at all. Just look at the example. I saw the boy. This is the principal clause. And who is my friend? This is a subordinate clause. So who is my friend is entirely dependent on the part I saw the boy. So the subordinate clause depends on this principal clause. But I saw the boy, it can sit independently. It doesn't depend on the subordinate clause, who is my friend. Now my question is, how can we know or how can we recognize a subordinate clause? I told you that who is my friend is a subordinate clause. But you may ask me a question that how can you understand that this is a subordinate clause and how can we understand that this is a principal clause? First come to subordinate clause. How can we recognize a subordinate clause? This is called a binder. Who is a binder? What is a binder? What is a binder? A binder is also called a subordinator or subordinating conjunction. What is a subordinating conjunction, or what is a subordinator, or what is a binder? A binder or subordinator or subordinating conjunction always binds two different kind of clauses. Here there is a principal clause and there is a subordinate clause. So these two clauses are bound with this binder, and a subordinate clause always starts with a binder. Now this is the binder, so a subordinate clause must start with this binder. So a subordinate clause must start with a binder. So when we locate that, when you recognize that there is a binder or subordinator or subordinating conjunction, we must understand that the subordinate clause starts from that. So the subordinate clause here starts from this binder or subordinator, right? So this is the way we can recognize, we can understand that what a subordinate clause is and how we can recognize a subordinate clause as well as a principal clause. Now, there is another clause, basic clause, that is called coordinate clause. When two principal clauses are coordinated together, mind it, when two principal clauses are coordinated with each other with some coordinators. What are these coordinators? These coordinators are coordinating conjunctions or linkers. These coordinators are called in other names coordinating conjunctions or linkers. When two principal clauses are linked, are coordinated with some coordinating conjunctions or linkers or coordinators, this is called a coordinate clause or coordinating clause. So these all are the basic concepts about phrase and clause. Thank you very much.